nasze spotkanie, nasze webinarium trzecie, które odbywa się w ramach projektu Between.Edukacja Kosmopolis 2020. Jest to projekt realizowany przez nas do końca października i projekt ten odbywa się dzięki wsparciu Kultury w sieci Narodowego Centrum Kultury, a także Uniwersytetu Gdańskiego. Jest wpisany w jubileusz 50-lecia Uniwersytetu Gdańskiego oraz dzięki wsparciu naszego stałego partnera, czyli Urzędu Miasta Sopotu. Dzisiejsze spotkanie rozpoczyna taki dwuskładnikowy komponent, a mianowicie teatr i niepełnosprawność. Dzięki Katarzynie Ojrzyńskiej z Uniwersytetu Łódzkiego możemy po raz pierwszy porozmawiać właśnie o teatrze niepełnosprawności. Dziś spotkanie Someone's Banging at the Door, Theatre and Disabilities odbędzie się w języku angielskim. Natomiast za tydzień zapraszamy, i przypominam wyjątkowo, jest to webinarium, które odbędzie się we wtorek, czyli za tydzień i jeden dzień, o niepełnosprawności, dostępności i języku. Dzisiejsze webinarium "Kto się dobija do drzwi? Teatr i niepełnosprawność" zostanie poświęcone problemowi dostępu osób z niepełnosprawnościami do zawodu aktorskiego. Porozmawiamy o przyczynach i konsekwencjach tak zwanego cripping-up, czyli popularnej strategii obsadzania aktorów i aktorek posiadających niepełnosprawności w rolach postaci niepełnosprawnych. Przyjrzymy się, jak aktorzy i aktorki z niepełnosprawnościami, artyści i artystki, aktywiści i aktywistki oraz inni sojusznicy i sojuszniczki osób niepełnosprawnych starają się zmienić stan rzeczy, przyczyniając się tym samym do tworzenia nowej estetyki teatru i nowych odczytań niepełnosprawności. Katarzyna Krąglewska, proszę o wprowadzenie naszego gościa.
Tak, nasz gość jest postacią wyjątkową. Dr Katarzyna Ojrzyńska pracuje na Uniwersytecie Łódzkim w Instytucie Anglistyki, w Zakładzie Angielskiego Dramatu, Teatru i Filmu. Jej naukowe, badawcze zainteresowania biegną takimi trzema głównymi torami. Pierwszy z nich to właśnie niepełnosprawność, o której będziemy tutaj rozmawiać. Ponadto studia performatywne i studia irlandzkie. Naturalnie te ścieżki muszą się przecinać co jakiś czas. Współpracuje także z Fundacją Teatr 21 i z Centrum Sztuki Włączającej Downtown. Jeśli chodzi o jej dorobek naukowy, to tutaj warto wspomnieć o książce poświęconej tańcu, przepraszam. W swojej książce opowiada o tańcu we współczesnym irlandzkim dramacie. Ta książka ma tytuł Dancing as if language no longer existed. Ponadto jest współredaktorką tomu Disability and the Census, Strategies of Disability Representation and Inclusion in Contemporary Culture. To jest najświeższa publikacja, ale jeszcze lada moment chyba powinna się ukazać kolejna rzecz, mianowicie za tydzień. To może doktor Ojrzyńska nam jeszcze opowie też, może będzie czas dzisiaj o tej książce. To jest książka Rosemary Garland Thompson o tym, jak się gapimy i o tym, jak patrzymy i jak pokazujemy siebie innym. Doktor Ojrzyńska jest autorką przekładu tej książki na język polski.
Dziękuję bardzo za to generous introduction. And I'm going to switch to English right now. And since it is a common practice at various disability-related events to say a few words about your appearance, I'm going to start by stating that I'm a white woman with reddish hair. I'm wearing glasses with brown frames, and I'm wearing a turquoise blouse with a white pattern. And right now I'm in my home office in Łódź, and there are some bookshelves right behind me. And I've prepared the presentation, which I'm going to show right now. Yep. Started. Okay, and the title of my presentation today is Someone's Banging at the Door, Theatre and Disability. And I would like to start this presentation with the image of a Hamlet in a wheelchair, which combines two things. On the one hand, white, stylized image of a person sitting in a wheelchair, which I trust looks familiar. You may find it in lavatories and public transport, parking lots, and generally it indicates the removal of certain architectural barriers, such as steps. It indicates that a given space is accessible to people with disabilities. And although I'm quite aware of the fact that this symbol is in many ways imperfect, and I'm quite aware of the fact that it has received a lot of criticism, but nevertheless, I'm going to use it here because it communicates the idea of accessibility in a very direct and straightforward manner. And the second element, or rather two elements, are a skull and a crown, which is an allusion to Hamlet, which is believed to require, which is a role that is believed to require acting skills of highest standards. So to my mind, the image that I've created has a kind of a clear iconic significance, as it symbolically indicates the right of people with disabilities to access theatre stage on equal terms with non-disabled actors, with non-disabled people. And this right was the subject of numerous debates in Western countries, but also in Poland. And I would like to focus a bit on Poland. And in order to do this, I think we need to move back in time to the year 2007, to Woodstock Festival, Poland, now known as Poland Rock Festival, which, as you may know, is not only about music. The festival also hosts the Academy of Finest Arts, Akademia Sztuk Przepięknych, where various artists, politicians, and various celebrities are invited to talk about their work. And in the year 2007, the organizers invited the famous Polish actress, Anna Dymna. And here you can see her in the photo. She's shown here as this kind of a motherly figure. She's kind of a towering above two wheelchair users, and they're holding hands. And here it is important to mention that Anna Dymna, apart from being a famous actress, she's also the founder of the Against the Odds Foundation, Fundacja Mimo Wszystko, which has been providing people with various disabilities with assistance, mostly financial assistance, since the year 2003. Apart from that, Anna Dymna also lectures at the theatre school in Krakow. And so, when she was invited to the festival, to Jurek Owsiak's festival, she openly stated that theatre schools are not for wheelchair users. And back then, she actually shared the story. And here is what she said. Last year, a boy in a wheelchair wanted to study at the theatre school in Krakow. His name was Marcin, and he wanted to be an actor. I had to explain it to him that he cannot be one because he's a wheelchair user. He wouldn't accept this and tried to convince me that he also has the right to be an actor. But an actor has to be able to play any role. So what's the point of giving him education in this field if he's not going to play any roles? Can you imagine Hamlet in a wheelchair? This would be a theatre revolution no theatre director would start. So later on, Dimna refused to comment on these words any further. So we may only suspect that this basically very reactionary statement was largely motivated by the fact that actors with disabilities may and usually do find it very difficult to find employment and to make a career. And this kind of instantly reminds me of Matt Fraser. You may remember this actor from, for instance, the American TV series American Horror Story and a season entitled Freak Show. Apart from that, Fraser also performs in the Grey Eye Theatre Company, which is probably the most well-known theatre company of deaf and disabled actors. And here you can see Fraser. He is quite a handsome guy in his, I think, mid-50s. And he has very atypical arms. So basically his hands start right below the elbow. He has a condition that is called phocomelia. So when Fraser performed one of the main roles in the American Horror Story, he thought that this could be his ticket to success, his ticket to Hollywood. But then he got really disappointed. And here I would like to quote from Alan Sutherland's transcription poem. Basically, Sutherland's transcription poems are interviews with various people, including Fraser, transformed into poems. So in one of his poems, Sutherland quotes Fraser, who says, "They have no intention of giving me a job in Hollywood. I was right for the freak show, but they can't see me as a neighbor or a father or a teacher. No way, no way." So does this mean that the roles of characters with disabilities, of characters with atypical bodies, with atypical minds are few and far between? Not necessarily. I haven't been able to find any statistics about theatre, but when discussing the acting profession, it might be interesting to take a look at the statistics about contemporary cinema. Especially that one might argue that unlike theatre, which often does not stick to realistic mimetic convention, unlike theatre where the actor's body serves as a sign that can be given various meanings, contemporary cinema is in a sense more mimetic. But as I will show in a moment, it often does not mimetically represent disability. So here a question to all of you. Can you think of any disabled film characters? I'll give you a moment to think about such characters. I think we could find some. I've made a list of some characters that come to my mind when I think about disability in contemporary film, popular film, in Hollywood movies, in particular. So here are some examples: Rain Man, My Left Foot, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, The Theory of Everything, Dancer in the Dark, Forrest Gump, and the Polish film, quite recent Polish film, Pieprzyca's Life Feels Good. So yeah, so what do these films have in common? As you might have guessed, what is most striking about these films is the fact that all of these roles of disabled characters were performed by non-disabled actors. And all of these actors received numerous awards for their performance. And it turns out that here we are speaking about a more general tendency. that has been observed by a number of critics, but also disability activists and actors with disabilities. And here I'd like to quote David J. Conner, who actually has done some research on this topic and who states, "A pattern I have noticed over the years is the prevalence of actors who are nominated for an Academy Award if they have played a disabled person. In reviewing Best Actor and Actress Oscar winners over a 30-year period from 1985 to 2014, 40% of both males and females in lead role played characters with disabilities. Of the 5 nominees each year, 19 of lead females played a disabled character, and 22% of lead males played a disabled character. So this is more than disability prevalence in the US, which is around 18% of the population. So what does it show? Well, it shows that there is a much higher likelihood of winning the Oscar if you play a disabled character. In other words, to quote Francis Ryan from The Guardian, can I hear someone in the background?
Pomagasz, to proszę Państwa, prosimy, jak ktoś nie zabierać, żeby wyłączyć mikrofon.
If you could mute yourself, thank you. Yep. Okay, so here I'd like to quote Francis Ryan, who wrote an article for The Guardian, an article with a very telling title, "We Wouldn't Accept Actors Blacking Up. So Why Applaud Cripping Up?" And this is what she says. "If you do a film about the Holocaust, you're guaranteed an Oscar," goes the famous Kate Winslet joke in Extras. The same could be said for an actor doing a film about disability. Unless you're a disabled actor, that is, then you're lucky to even get the part. So here she points to the prevalent strategy of casting non-disabled actors in the roles of disabled characters, which is very often referred to as cripping up. The term as such was coined by a disabled Welsh playwright, Kate O'Reilly, who was the first one to compare it to blacking up. And yes, and as you may know, blacking up was quite a popular strategy, a popular practice in the 19th century minstrel shows, where white actors blackened their faces in order to play the roles of characters of color. And here you can see a poster advertising one such minstrel show. So in the foreground, you can see a white actor, Billy Van, without a black face and with a black face. And in the upper left-hand corner, there's another white man, the owner of the show, William West. So basically, Ryan concludes that while blacking up in many countries is now seen as deeply offensive, we need to remember that minstrel shows presented Black people in a very exaggerating, mocking fashion. But yep, while blacking up is seen as inappropriate, as offensive, cripping up is still greeted with awards. So what are then the similarities between these two strategies? We might mention first of all that in both cases actors use prosthetics or props to alter their appearance in order to look like someone from a minority group. Secondly, in both cases, they often manipulate their voice or body to mimic them. Thirdly, they take a job from an actor who genuinely has that characteristic, and in doing so, perpetuate that group's underrepresentation in the industry. And thirdly, they do it for the entertainment of crowds, who, by and large, are part of the majority group. Yep, so why is cripping up so popular? It is certainly a convention that we've all got used to over the years. There is also a theory which says that the fact that non-disabled actors play disabled characters is somewhat comforting, reassuring for non-disabled audience, because most non-disabled people, most so-called normals, still see disability mostly through the prism of the medical model, in terms of lack, in terms of loss, as a kind of personal tragedy. Thus, real disability is seen as too depressing, too overwhelming. Normals are very often afraid of disability. They do not feel comfortable in the company of people with especially visible impairments, which some argue kind of reminds them about the fragility of their own bodies. So when they see Leonardo DiCaprio playing the role of Gilbert Grape's intellectually disabled brother, they're fully aware of the fact that what they see is just pretense, that DiCaprio is just pretending. They're aware of the fact that they do not witness the actual disability, the actual pain or struggle of real disabled human beings. So disability is very often seen as something that shouldn't be made public, should be hidden from view, is seen as, again, depressing, unsightly, ugly, unaesthetic. So this may be one of the reasons why disabled characters are more often than not played by non-disabled actors. And very often such representations of disabled characters are in fact inaccurate, because the actors mostly focus on just bodily expression, rather than on the complexity of the lived experience of disability. So basically, performing a role of a character with disability boils down to the emulation of certain physical symptoms. And even these symptoms, or the impairment, if you will, are often presented in a non-mimetic fashion. So as some disability activists and disabled actors argue, very often the performance of a non-disabled actor is exaggerated and inaccurate, which kind of brings us back to the concept of blacking up. Sometimes it's also maybe kind of a toned down in such a way so as to satisfy the audience's expectations. And when I was doing some basic research on the Polish movie Life Feels Good, I was quite shocked to find out that Dawid Ogrodnik, who played the main role in this film, the role of a young man whose story is closely based on the life of a real person with cerebral palsy, Przemysław Chrzanowski. So Ogrodnik said the following thing in an interview for Gazeta Wyborcza, and I've highlighted some of the most crucial fragments. So he said, I didn't want to copy his movements. Together with the director and the camera operator, we chose those gestures that the camera likes. We didn't want it to be too repulsive. Przemek is very spastic. He experiences so many twitches and contortions and uncontrolled impulses that are impossible to emulate. So whenever we're dealing with cripping up, we should ask ourselves a question. if you are witnessing an exceptionally good, realistic depiction of disability, or just a bunch of cliches that the audience expects, that the audience likes, or simply is used to. And here I would like to quote a disability activist, poet and playwright, and also performer, Cheryl Mary Wade. So here you can see her photo, her black and white photo. She's sitting in her wheelchair and laughing, and much like Fraser, she's also a person with very atypical hands. So Wade also notes that the problem of disability representation is largely connected with the non-disabled fixation on physical symptoms only. And this is what she says. Non-disabled actors think that disability is the character. That's what they're busy paying attention to playing. So all the attention and the emotion goes into having their head postured right, or the wrist lax, or whatever. It's playing a mannerism rather than playing a human being. To some extent, that's like a white guy putting on blackface. It's just offensive. So the focus is on the medical condition, or what we call the impairment, which remains at the center of attention. So the basic task that an actor or director deal with is how to make this impairment digestible for the audience, and how to make it fit in certain representational conventions, which more often than not reproduce certain stereotypes. And I would argue that this largely corresponds to similar processes that take place in real life. And here, let me introduce Bill Shannon. Bill Shannon is an experimental American dancer who also has a disability. He has a degenerative hip condition, and here you can see him in the middle of the street, kind of suspended in the air, suspended on his crutches, which are positioned on his skateboard. So basically, Shannon is very famous for his innovative choreographies. Some people call him the crutch master. And in his choreographies, he usually uses his crutches and his skateboard. And in one interview, he describes a process which he calls condition arriving. And he says, people make assumptions based on strictly visual consumption of my condition, without verbal communication with me. And I call that condition arriving. The condition arrived, but I didn't. I have this ghost-like presence that people see. I think it's something a lot of people with physical disabilities experience. So basically, he's not visible as a person. And I think that this is also very closely connected with yet another phenomenon, which has been discussed by a disability scholar, who also focuses a lot on performative arts, Petra Coopers. As you can see, she's also a person with disability. She's a wheelchair user. She has very short hair, and she's wearing glasses and red trousers and white blouse. And Petra Coopers very often speaks about the paradox of the hypervisibility and the invisibility of disability. So on the one hand, she stresses the fact that people with disabilities are kind of marginalized and thus invisible in public sphere, in social life. But on the other hand, they also tend to be kind of hyper visible. So whenever a non-disabled, perhaps not whenever, but very often when a non-disabled person sees a person with a visible impairment, this person instantly draws our attention. He or she kind of stands out from the crowd because she looks different. And this is kind of a very natural human reaction. And here I'm alluding to Rosemary Garland Thompson and her book on staring. People look at things and at other people who look different, whom they do not expect to see in their visual landscape. And they do so because they're curious. They want to learn something. And the problem is not so much curiosity, but the fact that when we see something new, we instantly try to explain it, to kind of familiarize it using the knowledge that we have. And what very often happens in those situations is what is sometimes called instant categorization. So the interpretation of disability in accordance with certain prevalent stereotypes and perceptions, which are very often very negative stereotypes. And so a disabled person is very often seen as poor, miserable, and in need of help. And this is also a problem that we may observe in theater and in, generally speaking, in cultural representation, where disability is seen as something essentially negative, as in terms of abnormality, impotence, sorry, lack and misery. And this connects a bit of theory, one last bit of theory for today, because this connects with a very famous theory put forward by two famous American scholars, David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder, who coined the term narrative prosthesis. So what they did is basically they studied dozens of cultural representations of disability, focusing mostly on Western culture, and they came up with a conclusion that in majority of cultural representations, disability serves as what they call a narrative prosthesis. So let us examine the term itself. Why prosthesis? A prosthesis, a narrative prosthesis, is in a sense similar to cosmetic prosthesis, as it aims to hide the impairment, understood as something bad and slightly dysfunctional. It aims to make it inconspicuous, invisible, as they put it to, it removes the unsightly from view. So it kind of adjusts a disabled body to the expectations of the non-disabled. And again, a quote from Mitchell and Snyder. If disability falls too far from an acceptable norm, a prosthetic intervention seeks to accomplish an erasure of difference altogether. Yet failing that, as is always the case with prosthesis, the minimal goal is to return one to an acceptable degree of difference. Why the narrative? And as they claim, our phrase narrative prosthesis is meant to indicate that disability has been used as a crutch upon which literary narratives lean for their representational power. So disability often plays an important narrative role, first of all, as an obstacle that needs to be overcome. Secondly, it is also often used as a device of characterization, a tool used in an instrumental way to attract the reader's attention. And last but not least, disability often serves as an opportunistic metaphorical device. A metaphorical signifier of social and individual collapse. So a metaphor is something negative. And this is also quite conspicuous in theater. Just to give you an example, I would like to mention Joan Linville's 2000 production of Hamlet, featuring Christopher Thornton. Thornton is an actor who is also a wheelchair user after he had a major rock climbing accident, which basically left him paralyzed from the waist down. And writing about this particular production of Hamlet, one critic, Lila Morris, notes that all of the advertisements, as well as the program cover, presented Thornton in a wheelchair. So they all made his disability kind of a hyper visible. And as Morris further argues, this icon of a wheelchair-bound prince introduces the audience to a new conception of Hamlet. The young Dane whose tragic flaw lies in his inability to act is so emotionally disabled that the wheelchair becomes merely a physical manifestation of his intellectual drama. So his disability serves here again as a metaphor. It represents Hamlet's inability to act, his passivity, his inability to decide to be or not to be. So disability is used instrumentally as a narrative, or should I say, theatrical prosthesis. And this concept of the theatrical prosthesis is ingeniously mocked by a former actor, Simon Peckham, in his 2008 novel entitled The Opposite Bastard. The novel centers on a quadriplegic Oxford undergraduate, Michael Owen, who decides to take part in the local student production of Shakespeare's masterpiece. And this is what the non-disabled director, whose name accidentally is Philip Sidney, says upon learning that Michael would like to join the cast, and well, he would actually like to perform Hamlet. I see Hamlet very much as a metaphor for our own times. Mankind bereft of its metaphysical crutches, alone in the universe, which the more he understands, the greater his feelings of impotence and rage. What better symbol of this than a Hamlet who couldn't kill Claudius, even if he decided that that was what he really wanted? A Hamlet in a wheelchair, frozen from the neck down. So this shows that, this serves as a kind of an example of what Shannon called condition arriving and what Mitchell and Snyder call narrative prosthesis. And this also suggests that it is quite difficult to put the audience in a situation in which, upon seeing disability on the stage, they're not going to interpret it through the prism of certain popular stereotypes and cliches. And I share the idea expressed by many disability activists and disabled actors that this can only be done through greater participation of people with disabilities in the process of making theater performance. This also includes access of people with disabilities to the acting profession. And here let me quote Grzegorz Jarzyna, the artistic director of the Variety Theatre in Warsaw, who participated in 2015 Warsaw Week of Culture Without Barriers. And he stated the following: To my mind, theatre schools should not be open only to the canonical features of the young people who are to become actors. In other words, beauty, appropriate stature, perfect teeth and diction. If we can overcome the stereotypical approach, theatre academies will become more open to people and to the new possibilities of theatre. It's most important that the actors and their emotions are real, and that the actors know how to effectively communicate with the audience, that they do not pretend, and that their stories are real. So what Ojrzyńska basically does is he postulates that we should rethink our ideas about what theatre is, about what an actor should look like, and what it means to be a good actor. In other words, he argues that theatre should not reinforce certain stereotypical models, canons of beauty and bodily perfection. He argues that bodily perfection is not a necessary element of good theatre. It is not what good acting is all about, as it is about finding a means to effectively communicate with the audience, right? To make them witness and experience some real emotions. And this may open up certain new possibilities, opportunities for experimentation, for finding, devising new ways of communicating with the audience. So why shouldn't we introduce these new opportunities and ideas to the mainstream? After all, as Nabil Shaban, as a Jordanian English actor with brittle bones, who performed the role of Hamlet as early as in 1988 in London, in a production by a Cleveland Theatre Company. So as he states, so if you're doing Hamlet or Macbeth or whatever, it is not the immediate physicality of the people that's important, but what it's saying about human condition, about revenge, about jealousy, about aspirations, ambition, megalomania, or whatever, or love. And of course, making the acting profession more accessible to people with disabilities is not an easy task. Because basically we've created a world that is adjusted to the needs of the non-disabled majority. So it's not enough to ask theatre schools to admit students with disabilities. It is not enough to allow disabled students follow a program of studies adjusted to the needs of their non-disabled colleagues in a space that is probably not necessarily accessible to people with disabilities. So there's a lot of work to be done in this field, but this work can be very productive, it can be very fruitful, especially that there are so many other things at stake here. Because theatre may function as a platform for a deeply humanistic educational project, which seeks to familiarize the audiences with rich human diversity, and which gives voice to those whose stories have remained untold. And here I would like to go back to the title of my presentation. So writing about British theatre of the 1950s, Ronald Hayman wrote the following words. The working classes that had been banging at the door of British theatre for so long have finally been let in. So today, as a result of the development of activism of people with disabilities and disability arts, a similar process is taking place. But this time, these are people with disabilities that are banging at the door. And letting them in is not just a matter of social justice, of giving them the right to self-representation, but it is also a step towards artistic and aesthetic innovation, towards finding new ways of expression and communicating with the audience. And yes, I'm heading towards the conclusion, but I would just like to mention that a few days ago, I read an article in the Polish magazine Dialog, an article by Karolina Pawłoś, who is a student of theatre studies in Warsaw, and it's written in the form of a letter to a person called Marcin, to the Marcin whom Anna didn't want to admit to the theatre school in Krakow. And this article is written from a perspective of a person who doesn't have much experience in disability studies and who has just recently gained some interest in the topic. So it has some flaws, but it makes a very important and a very powerful statement. So basically what Pawłoś does, she states that theatre is a space of freedom which helps transgress boundaries. She states that homogeneous theatre is restrictive, it is limiting. And finally, she concludes that we have already witnessed the death of an author. And now is the time for the death of the professional actor, who, as she argues, should be replaced by what she calls a real actor, with his or her own history, physicality, uniqueness. Yet I don't think that this problem can be solved by doing away with the concept of professional actor altogether by, for instance, closing down theatre schools. But I would rather suggest creating some alternatives to conventional, able-centric models of actor training. And I think that this change has already started, and I'm speaking here, for instance, about certain grassroots initiatives, certain theatre projects, certain theatre companies of actors with various disabilities that over years have grown professional and now are offering various forms of actor training. Sometimes they also open their own schools for students with various types of disabilities. As you already know, I specialize in Irish studies. So one of the examples comes from Ireland, the Irish Blue Teapot Theatre Company, a theatre company, professional theatre company of actors with intellectual disabilities. For the last few years, they have been running a state-accredited school for students with ID. So in other words, students with intellectual disability. We may also find several similar companies in the UK, companies that offer actor training for people with disabilities, such as the most well-known Grey Eye Theatre Company, which from the very beginning was a very professional theatre company for deaf actors and actors with other disabilities. And as a matter of fact, they offer much more than just actor training. Here is an excerpt from their website. Grey Eye champions the inclusion of deaf and disabled people in the arts through intensive actor and writer training initiatives, access support for creative and learning situations, empowering workshops and training programs for young artists led by inspiring role models, and a range of training models for the creative sector from inclusive practice for drama school through to accessible e-marketing for theatre venues. So what these companies do is they develop their own acting styles, their own methods of work, their own teaching methodologies, and their own accessibility solutions. Sometimes they work from scratch, sometimes they take inspiration from other similar companies, and then they find ways to share their expertise, to share their experience with others. And this very idea is even very nicely communicated by the name of the company, Grey Eye. The Grey Eye were three wise sisters of a Greek legend who shared one eye and one tooth. So the Grey Eye ethics is kind of grounded in working together and sharing resources. And finally, let me just note that these companies do not function only on the margin, outside the mainstream. They can and they do make an influence on professional acting, on those more traditional acting schools, through various forms of collaboration, as in the case of the collaboration between a British theatre company of actors with intellectual disability, a company called Access All Areas Theatre, and the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, which for some time now has been offering an opportunity for adults with a learning disability or autism to undertake professional performance training, focusing on physical, voice, and collaboration and devising, after which the students receive a performance-making diploma. So the slide shows an excerpt from their website. Yep. And I think that such companies are the ones that are most effective in broadening our understanding of professional acting. And that's why it is so important to support them in creating a space where they can grow professional, develop their own methods of acting and of actor training, and where they can share this experience with others. And that's why I was very happy to hear that the Kosmopolis Between team with Tomasz at the helm have been supporting Theatre 21, so the Polish professional theatre of actors with intellectual disability, in their endeavors, because quite recently Theatre 21 has finally found its a permanent place, a permanent venue, which still needs renovation, and they need quite a lot of money to renovate this new place, their new venue. Okay, and with this, I think I would like to finish. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katarzyna, for this impressive lecture, for this impressive webinar that started some important phase in our discussion, which opens up a completely new field for our thoughts, I guess. Perhaps it's time when we can ask you questions, when we can comment on the ideas that you introduced. Maybe just giving us time to think about comments and questions. I would like to, I hope to formulate the questions that I will manage to formulate the question, or perhaps to share various thoughts that that occurred also to me. It's impressive. It's impressive. You presented an impressive range of approaches to the theme of disabilities, of the problems, and the problems that actors may come across. My three thoughts are the following. Maybe I will start with the first one. It was quite interesting when you started speaking about Jarzyna, also about actors needing to expose their physicality and basic conditions in which they live, which immediately called to my mind, sort of brought to my mind Grotowski's idea of a performer, of something that Przemek Grotowski shares with us so frequently, of taking physicality and taking the personality of an actor into the play with acting of his sort of research in a slightly different way. And I just wonder, as a question, whether it's one of the contexts which may appear when speaking about theatre and disabilities. Also, the issue that you mentioned about the recent article, letter in dialogue. No, it's the second one is connected with our mutual. The second thought, perhaps a question, deals with some notions in Samuel Beckett's that bring us together. I always think about the wheelchair, which is an interesting probe, but at the same time, which brings famous actors into the role of Ham. And what do you think? I know that there were some attempts. You spoke about some attempts of companies trying to explore Beckett's sort of words also with it. I know that whenever reading reviews, the question of stereotypes occurs when actors, I don't know, Mark Rylance, Alan Cumming, or Marek Severin will have to face stereotypes connected with the wheelchair acting. I would put it in this way. And the third question, third issue, I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud. Forgive me if it is naive. Forgive me if it is somehow not based on your knowledge. I want to frame somehow my thoughts. I'm always afraid of professional theatre treating minorities of various kinds in an instrumental way when, staging characters with disabilities and taking real actors with disabilities to play these roles. I'm asking about another issue, another dimension, which sometimes occurs in an ethical way when professional theatre deals with non-professional actors. I hope that you understand what I mean, even if the wording is inappropriate or inaccurate. Kasia, are there any questions? These thoughts, would you respond to some of them or
Yes, absolutely. I've got a question to your third question, actually. But before that, I would just start with Beckett, who is very close to my heart. And yep, I think that the thing is with Beckett is I think that he is, in many ways, he represents disability in a very unique way. Actually, I think that most of the characters in Beckett are in some ways disabled, or I think that all his work shows us characters who are either disabled or temporarily able-bodied. So I think that, actually I don't think that Beckett in any way kind of shows disability as particularly, I don't know, tragic, traumatizing. It's just a kind of a natural part of human existence. And I think that should be should be accepted, and that we should be prepared for. And I think that this is something that that very nicely connects to disability studies and certain contemporary perceptions of disability. And you were talking a bit about stereotypes connected specifically to wheelchairs.
To the movement of characters, sort of. I remember when reading reviews, sort of famous actors, famous physical actors with physical strength, playing harm basically,
Yeah.
as being inaccurate in terms of stereotypes connected with.
Yeah, with harm, I think it's really complicated, because I think that's actually it's quite clear from Beckett's, I think, notebooks. There is a clear suggestion that Ham is only pretending to be disabled. So okay. I think that's yes. So when it comes to this specific role, I think that there is a kind of a strong suggestion in the text, or rather in the notebooks and Beckett's theatre notebooks, that actually Ham is an able-bodied guy who is pretending to be disabled in order to make Clive stay with him. So I think that's in this
being
case,
an actor, basically, yeah, being an actor.
Yeah.
As a condition also of an actor. Okay, that's.
I would say that actually this, even if it's inaccurate, or if it's actually the cripping up makes sense here.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, and thank you for mentioning Grotowski. I think that's yeah, that's certainly Pawłosz is writing from this specific perspective, and that she makes perhaps doesn't make an explicit allusion to Grotowski, but I think that her argument is also strongly rooted in this approach. And I totally forgot about your third question. Was about
which means it's not that important. Okay? Thank you very much, Katarzyna. Dziękuję bardzo. Też chciałbym zachęcić, jeżeli ktoś miałby ochotę po polsku porozmawiać teraz. Jesteśmy w tej mniej formalnej części. So English, Polish, the languages which may be used here. I highly encourage you to share us, to join us.
Ja również zachęcam, również po polsku.
Kasia, jak zawsze po polsku, twoje wykłady, nie słucham ciebie po raz pierwszy, oczywiście, ale zawsze otwierają dla mnie zupełnie nowe horyzonty praktyczne i intelektualnie, i jestem ci bardzo, bardzo wdzięczny za to. Zawsze to jest przeżycie intelektualne, moralne, społeczne. Bardzo, bardzo ci dziękuję. Jestem teatrologiem, to więc mogę słuchać tylko, ale to naprawdę, a bardzo jak mogę, bardzo często chodzę do teatru. I ja widzę ogromne możliwości w tym, co rysujesz właśnie. Dziękuję.
Dziękuję bardzo, bardzo, David, za te miłe słowa. No i myślę, że też właśnie Trójmiasto ma duży tutaj potencjał, ponieważ tutaj też w Trójmieście coraz bardzo aktywnie też działają pewne teatry osób z niepełnosprawnościami. One się wywodzą właśnie, tak jak to zwykle bywa w Polsce, z teatroterapii. Jest takiego podejścia terapeutycznego, natomiast widzę, że coraz więcej tego rodzaju zespołów tutaj stara się wejść na tą ścieżkę profesjonalną, tak jak na przykład Biuro Rzeczy Osobistych, no też bardzo dużo dobrych rzeczy się dzieje w teatrze szekspirowskim, z tego co słyszałam. I także właśnie z różnych stron było też przedstawienie inspirowane Hamletem właśnie jakiś czas temu, a pokazywane w teatrze szekspirowskim właśnie w wykonaniu zespołów aktorów z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną. Jak również osoby z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną mam nadzieję, że nadal są, bo wiem, że były zatrudniane w biurze obsługi widzów, więc myślę, że bardzo dużo fajnych rzeczy też się dzieje właśnie w Trójmieście.
Dziękuję, naprawdę.
Dzień dobry, mogę? Ja spróbuję włączyć kamerę, ale mam tutaj troszeczkę takie, teraz zobaczymy, czy się uda. Dzień dobry. Bardzo dziękuję za ten wykład, był to niezwykle interesujący. Ja też mam kilka takich myśli, które, że tak powiem, ten wykład był tak ciekawy, że wiele myśli przyszło takich, zaczęło się tam formułować. Ja z kolei zaczęłam się zastanawiać w pewnym momencie, co to znaczy grać. To znaczy, co to znaczy grać jakąś rolę, tak? I jak sięgniemy do bardzo odległych czasów, tak? Kiedy w zasadzie grać pewną rolę to było wyrecytować pewne i w sposób retoryczny właściwie przedstawić tekst, tak? Rolę, którą nam podano. I tam to ciało wydawało być, znaczy ruch ciała był dosyć schematyczny, jeżeli w ogóle był istotny, to był schematyczny. I zyskiwało większe znaczenie w teatrze. To jest niesamowite, bo to w jakimś sensie jest to paradoks, że co my, że aktorzy właśnie fizycznie, fizyczność aktora, niepełnosprawność fizyczna aktora staje się jakoś tak, próbuje się ją, znaczy nie chcę powiedzieć, że jest nieważna, staje się nieważna, tylko nie może już stać na przeszkodzie właśnie w czasach, kiedy to właśnie wydawałoby się, że
Zgadnijmy cię na chwileczkę, jeśli byś powtórzyła, chyba nie tylko mój problem, prawda?
Tak.
Sekundę cię nie było z nami.
Mamy straszną burzę w Warszawie, więc ja mam nadzieję, że w ogóle za chwilę nie rozłączy nas tutaj. Chciałam powiedzieć, że paradoksalnie niepełnosprawność w teatrze staje się, znaczy jest tak bardzo mocno podkreślana w teatrze i staje się czymś ważnym dla teatru w momencie, kiedy właśnie to ciało jest ważne w teatrze. Dla mnie jest to jednak troszeczkę paradoksalne, bo gdybyśmy pomyśleli o tym, że wracamy teraz do, nie wiem, czasów Szekspira czy XVII-XVIII wiek, taki styl deklamacyjny, tak? I w zasadzie wówczas może bardziej sprawny fizycznie, tak? Bo obaj są w stanie wygłosić pewien tekst w taki sam sposób. Natomiast teraz, kiedy w teatrze tak bardzo ważne jest ciało, właśnie w tym momencie zaczynamy się przyglądać, podkreślać tą rolę aktora niepełnosprawnego. Nie wiem, czy dobrze sformułowałam tą myśl.
Aczkolwiek tutaj jakby też nie chciałam się ograniczać do tej niepełnosprawności fizycznej i dlatego też starałam się wpleść też fragmentów o niepełnosprawności intelektualnej, gdzie właściwie tutaj bardzo często właśnie teatry osób z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną operują głównie ciałem, a bardzo często unikają słowa. Nie wszystkie, co prawda, chcąc jakby w pewien sposób imitować pewne standardy ekspresji właśnie cielesnej, teatrów sprawnych. Więc jest na przykład bardzo, bardzo mało teatrów, myślę, że osób z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną, które stawiają na ekspresję werbalną, które chociaż bardzo często ich aktorzy porozumiewają się werbalnie, operują słowem, tylko w jakieś sposoby, które są, powiedzmy, no, nie spełniają, powiedzmy, tych standardów recytacyjnych, prawda, i aktorskich, więc myślę, że to jest jeszcze taki ciekawy wątek, który tutaj się pojawia. No i inna sprawa, no to właśnie tak, no ciekawe, w jaki sposób rzemiosło teatralne kodyfikuje się, w jaki sposób jakoś tak zastyga w pewnych stereotypach. Natomiast odnośnie właśnie jeszcze ciała w teatrze, tak właśnie końcówki Pani wypowiedzi nie słyszałam za dobrze, więc tak się jeszcze zastanawiam, do czego tutaj powinnam się jeszcze odnieść.
To nie było tak bardzo precyzyjnie zastanawianie się nad tym, nie wiem, czy słychać mnie, bo ja się cały czas obawiam, że jest tak. Znaczy, nie byłoby to być może jakoś precyzyjnie zadane pytanie, raczej myśl, bo też to kolejna myśl, która przyszła mi w trakcie Pani wykładu, zresztą bardzo ciekawego, no, to było to, jak się ma właśnie, bo mówiła Pani o tym, że pewne przez aktorów, tak? Aktorów, którzy dostają za to nagrody, tak? Za to, że właśnie są w stanie tak niepełnosprawność odegrać, tak? Że to jest to pewnie na poziomie pewnych stereotypów. Na ile jest to też sposób, no, jesteśmy teraz bardzo mocno na fali, są wszystkie badania nad tak zwanym embodied mind, tak? Nad tym umysłem, który jest w ciele i poprzez naśladowanie, poprzez cielesność też wyraża się jakiś sposób myślenia. Tak? Na ile aktor, który przyjmuje pewne, no, możliwe, że do pewnego stopnia stereotypowe gesty, zachowania, jest też to dla niego sposób, no, wczucia się w pewną rolę, tak?
Tak, Stanisławski. No. Jakby zaczynając od ciała, żeby wczuć się w jakąś rolę, natomiast no tak, tak, myślę, że wczuwa się w jakąś rolę, natomiast wczuwa się w rolę bardzo stereotypową. Ja bardzo podziwiam aktorów, którzy starają się troszeczkę wyjść poza mimo wszystko to ciało, ale dotrzeć do tego, co właściwie jest w dużej mierze nieznane, czyli do tego codziennego doświadczenia niepełnosprawności. Tutaj przypomina mi się taka sztuka Briana Freela, Molly Sweeney. Genialna sztuka, chociaż może teatralnie trochę nudna, bo tam mamy właściwie trzy postacie, które wygłaszają takie przydługawe monologi. I ona traktuje o osobie z dysfunkcją wzroku, która przechodzi operację, która ma ten wzrok naprawić, po czym ta operacja poniekąd przywraca jej ten wzrok, natomiast ona doświadcza powiedzielibyśmy, takiej dysfunkcji, takiego uszkodzenia, która polega na tym, że jej mózg nie przetwarza tutaj wszystkich bodźców, które otrzymuje ze środowiska, bodźców wizualnych, no i ona wtedy się staje całkowicie właściwie niewidoma, nie może się zupełnie odnaleźć w tym nowym świecie, w każdym bądź razie, wracając do aktorstwa, tam w spektaklu, który pokazano w Abbey Theatre, aktorka, która grała właśnie tutaj tytułową postać Molly Sweeney, jakby starając się wejść w tą rolę, to nie tylko naśladowała ten wymiar fizyczny tego, jak stereotypowo osoba niewidoma porusza się, co bardzo często jest właśnie w ten sposób pokazywane, że gdzieś tam się potyka, gdzieś tam się przewraca, czy też właśnie chodzi z wyciągniętymi rękami do przodu, ale starała się jakoś wkroczyć w środowisko osób niewidomych i sama była też zszokowana tym, co odkryła, jak na przykład osoby niewidome pływają na basenie, jak niesamowicie potrafią być skoordynowane. I to ona jako ta osoba nieposiadająca niepełnosprawności czuła się wśród nich właściwie jako niesprawna, bo pływając z nimi cały czas kogoś kopała, cały czas na kogoś wpadała, czyli właściwie tutaj myślę, że także właśnie wyjście poza to naśladownictwo cielesności, ale i próba jakby zapoznania się z takim szerszym doświadczeniem fizycznym świata, ale także doświadczeniem pewnych barier społecznych doświadczonych przez osoby niepełnosprawne może być takie bardzo mind-opening i może prowadzić do też ciekawych odkryć dla aktora.
Zapraszamy kolejne osoby do zabrania głosu, komentarzy, pytań.
Ja zastanawiałam się podczas tego wystąpienia nad kwestią reżyserów, ponieważ oczywiście rozumiem, że temat tego webinarium dotyczył aktorów, natomiast szukając gdzieś odpowiedzi na to, dlaczego osoby z niepełnosprawnościami nie są włączane do teatru znaczy zazwyczaj nie są włączane, tak, na prawach takich samych jak aktorzy pełnosprawni. Właśnie szukając odpowiedzi, dlaczego tak jest, pomyślałam o tym, że może też jest tak, że reżyserzy, którzy nie mają na przykład zajęć jakichś choćby fakultatywnych, jeśli oni nie wiedzą, nie mają nawet podstawowej wiedzy na temat różnych niepełnosprawności, czy to fizycznych, czy to intelektualnych, których jest przecież, one są bardzo różnorodne, ich połączenia też są bardzo różnorodne, to myślę, że też taki reżyser może się najzwyczajniej w świecie bać, że zrobi coś źle, że coś mu się nie uda, że kogoś skrzywdzi w jakiś sposób. I zastanawiałam się właśnie nad tym, czy w tej dziedzinie są podejmowane jakieś kroki, czy orientuje się może Pani, jak to wygląda na właśnie uczelniach teatralnych, bo to, że nie przyjmują osób z niepełnosprawnościami na aktorstwo, to odnotowałam, natomiast jak to jest właśnie na reżyserii, czy w ogóle, bo też druga część moich przemyśleń jest taka, że czym innym jest właśnie to angażowanie osób z niepełnosprawnościami w różne warsztaty, projekty i tak dalej, a czym innym jest właśnie to takie pełnoprawne, że to jest na przykład aktor, który dostaje wypłatę. Nie tylko to, że on może wystąpić na scenie i poczuć się aktorem, ale on dostaje wypłatę jako pełnoprawny aktor. I właśnie nad tym się zastanawiam, nad tą nad tą kwestią reżyserii najbardziej, tak? To chyba tego dotyczy moje pytanie.
Tego jeszcze nie sprawdzałam, ale to bardzo ciekawy wątek i będę musiała tutaj zrobić mały research na ten temat. Natomiast zdecydowanie to prawda, że no właściwie no to wszyscy normalsi, którzy nie mieli styczności z osobami niepełnosprawnymi, no to po prostu się troszeczkę boją tych interakcji, nie wiedzą jak. Dlatego w przyszłym tygodniu też będę tutaj troszeczkę mówić o języku, o tym, jak mówić o niepełnosprawności i trochę kwestii poruszę związanych z dostępnością. Natomiast natomiast tutaj też mi się przypomina taka historia, choć nie znam właśnie odpowiedzi na Pani pytania, ale przypomina mi się taka historia właściwie kolegi, który współpracował właśnie z irlandzkim Blue Teapot Theatre. Oni zrobili taką bardzo słynną sztukę Sanctuary, która dotyczy praw osób z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną w Irlandii właściwie do intymności, ale także do nawiązywania relacji romantycznych, do seksu, bo przez pewien czas w Irlandii, właściwie no, tak dosyć do niedawna, uprawianie seksu z osobą z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną było karane bardzo wysokimi karami więzienia. W każdym bądź razie ta sztuka zmieniła irlandzkie prawo, przyczyniła się do zmiany irlandzkiego prawa i stała się również głośna, dlatego ponieważ bardzo szybko ona została zaadaptowana na film i tutaj głównym reżyserem był Len Collin. Len Collin jest brytyjskim reżyserem i tak miałam okazję z Lenem rozmawiać właściwie na ten temat, na temat jego doświadczeń z aktorami Blue Teapot, bo on też miał bardzo wiele różnych obaw, jak to będzie miał właściwie cały zespół aktorów z niepełnosprawnością intelektualną i właściwie jak on sobie poradzi, jak w ogóle się obchodzić z tymi ludźmi. Oczywiście wcześniej się poznali, polubili, natomiast tak miał wielkie dylematy odnośnie tego, jak to będzie wyglądało na planie filmowym. No i potem był bardzo zdziwiony, ponieważ okazało się, że właściwie to pracowało mu się tak samo jak z aktorami sprawnymi. Tylko, że podkreślam jeszcze raz, to są profesjonalni aktorzy, to są aktorzy, którzy od lat grają w tym teatrze i chociaż to był ich właściwie pierwszy styk z kinem, no i po raz pierwszy pracowali na planie filmowym, to posiadali bardzo wysokie kompetencje jako aktorzy teatralni, no i doskonale sobie tutaj poradzili z tą sytuacją, więc bardzo często okazuje się, że pewne obawy są nieuzasadnione.
Dziękuję.
Dziękuję bardzo. Mamy czas jeszcze na jedno pytanie, na jeden komentarz, także serdecznie zapraszam wykorzystać ten czas.
To ja bym się chciała odnieść tylko do wiadomości od Ani Radkiewicz, która niestety musiała pędzić już po 20, czego mi bardzo szkoda, bo wiem, że byłaby ważnym głosem w tej rozmowie. Natomiast jeżeli chodzi o wydarzenia związane z teatrem osób z niepełnosprawnościami, to myślę, że jedną z takich najfajniejszych inicjatyw jest teatralny pasjans, który organizuje Gdański Teatr Szekspirowski. W tym roku, pomimo pandemii, jest już 6. edycja organizowana. I jest to program, który polega na tym, że tę samą sztukę, ten sam dramat adaptują 3 różne grupy osób, które są narażone na wykluczenie społeczne, na jakieś tego typu sytuacje. To jest młodzież, to są osoby z niepełnosprawnościami właśnie i to są seniorzy. Więc jakby te 3 grupy, które są jakby pozornie daleko od siebie w takim codziennym życiu, mają okazję zobaczyć, jak osoby zupełnie różne od nich wypowiadają te same słowa ze sceny. I właśnie zawsze te spektakle przygotowane przez osoby z niepełnosprawnościami są niezwykłe po prostu, jakby w żaden sposób nie są zupełnie inne od tych przygotowanych przez seniorów, przez przez młodzież, ale są po prostu zawsze bardzo doceniane, bo są niepowtarzalne, absolutnie inne w swoim rodzaju.
Dziękuję bardzo. Właśnie zauważyłam tutaj, zajrzałam do czatu od razu, no i właśnie widzę tutaj King Lear on a wheelchair. Czyli rzeczywiście bardzo dużo się w Gdańsku dzieje. I warto to śledzić. O, Tomku, chyba cię nie słychać.
No właśnie zauważyłam. Przemówiło również do mnie tutaj linkiem. Kasiu, bardzo Ci dziękujemy za dzisiejsze spotkanie, za to, że no właśnie dajesz nam wiele do myślenia, nowych horyzontów, poszerzasz nasze horyzonty i też sprawiasz, że no, otrzymujemy tutaj wiele ciekawych nowych informacji, ale też po prostu spraw do przemyślenia sobie samym. Bardzo Ci za to dziękuję osobiście oraz w imieniu nas wszystkich, naszej tutaj szerokiej grupy z Warszawy, z różnych miejsc, z Trójmiasta również, myślę, dosyć obficie. A rozmowę naszą będziemy kontynuowali za tydzień we wtorek, także mam nadzieję, że wszyscy się tutaj spotkamy, a także być może kilka nowych osób będzie. Zobaczymy, jak będzie. Natomiast z pewnością Ty będziesz, Kasiu, i we wtorek kolejny się spotykamy. Dziękuję Państwu również bardzo za dzisiejsze spotkanie, za dzisiejsze webinarium.
Dziękuję również.
Do widzenia.
Dziękujemy, dobranoc.
Dobranoc.
Dobranoc.